What's going on, everybody? It's AG here. It's time to take a look at this week's college football playoff power rankings. So, what I've done here is done a tier list of the 28 teams that I think still are alive for a potential college football playoff berth. So, the four categories we have here, we have locks, should be in, could be in, and then so you're telling me there's a chance. So, first off, I know you're going to say 28 teams is way too many that realistically have a shot. So, the teams that are still in play that you're going to think shouldn't be on this list are somewhat, it's way an outsider's chance, but they have a slim chance of potentially making their conference championship. So that's why they're on this list. So we'll go ahead and start at the top. We'll start with the locks. So these are the four teams that I think could still afford a loss and are still going to be in the playoff, even if they lose this week. Starting off, Oregon, they're undefeated. They are in no matter what. Even if they somehow drop the game, they're still going to be in without an issue. Now, the real question when it comes to not on this lock category, but moving forward, how much is the committee going to punish teams for losing in their conference championship? So let's say A&M beats Texas this week. They make the SEC championship. They lose to Georgia. That gives you a team with 4 losses that has a win over Texas. Do they get in somehow? And same thing with Georgia. Let's say Georgia loses to Georgia Tech. Then they lose, or something. They lose to Texas. I don't know. But you're looking at a scenario here where you could have a team with 4 losses that has an argument to potentially be in particular, if Georgia wins this week. And then, all bets are off here on what could happen. But let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Ohio State is the next team in my lock category. They've beaten Indiana. They've beaten Penn State, 2 teams that should be in the playoff most likely. So Ohio State is in. They could lose to Michigan this week, and it's not going to matter. They could lose probably to Michigan and Oregon. I still think they get in no matter what. Texas, had they beaten anybody? Not really, but those teams that are not very good that they've beat are beating these other teams that are dropping these other teams with 3 losses. So at a certain point, you got to be rewarded for beating who's on your schedule. So Texas is in, even with a loss to A&M or Georgia, they'll be in. And if you don't know the SEC tiebreaker as of right now, Georgia's in the championship. They're going to play the winner of A&M and Texas. That's how it's going to work. Notre Dame, I think they are a lock. They could lose to USC this week. They're going to be in. They've got that loss to Northern Illinois. Yes. Have they beaten anybody? Also up for debate. They beat A&M. That's probably their best win on the season. Louisville is a solid team as well. Who have they beat that's really good? That's probably your 2 best wins. But I think they could afford a loss to USC, and they'll still be in because so many teams are down to 3 losses now. You're running out of teams here. All right, so now we're moving on to should be in. These are teams I think could afford a loss and still get in. Georgia, they've got Georgia Tech this week. They've also got the SEC championship the next week. I think they're in. With how the SEC has kind of cannibalized itself, I think Georgia has risen above that pack. They've got a win over Texas. That's good. They've got a close loss to Alabama. So I think Georgia is in. Now that Ole Miss loss is a little questionable, but Georgia's in good shape. They should be in. Penn State, I think they could afford a loss as well. They play, I think, Maryland this week. They're not going to make the Big Ten championship unless Ohio State loses to Michigan. If that happens, they'll make the championship. But Penn State, I think, is in good shape. They can afford another loss because, again, so many teams have 3 losses now where you're running out of 2-loss teams. All right, so now we're looking at could be in. These are teams that if the playoff ended right now would most likely be in, but there's wiggle room here where if they did lose this week or something, you might have some issues there. All right, so Boise State, as of right now, they look like head and shoulders above everybody else as far as the favorite to make it out of the G5, but if something happens, if there's a slip up to where they lose to the UNLV in the championship, they lose this week to whoever they're playing, do they get dropped out? I think there's definitely a possibility despite where they're ranked right now. Tennessee is the next one. They should be in good shape. All they got to do is beat Vanderbilt this week, and they are in. But if they lose that game, again, it's going to come down to an argument between which 3-loss SEC team is going to get in, and we'll get to all those 3-loss teams here in a little bit. But you're going to run into that issue with this team beat this team lost to this team. It's almost going to come down to, do you value quality wins or do you value quality losses as far as comparing resumes there? Indiana, I think they most likely are in unless they somehow lose this week to Purdue. They won't. But if they lost to Purdue, they would drop out. But as of right now, I think they're in because so many other teams lost this week that Indiana, despite, somewhat playing with Ohio State, but ultimately kind of getting blown out, they're in. Miami is the next one. Now, originally, I thought there was a chance that 2 ACC teams could get in. There's still opportunity for that, but it's looking less and less likely, I think, since everybody is lost now, being Miami since they lost in conference play. They've got Syracuse this week. If they lose that game, I could see an issue to where they wouldn't get in if they didn't win their championship. You know what I mean? But as of right now, they're in good shape. Win that game, and then they're probably in, even if they lose to SMU somehow in the ACC championship. SMU, similar scenario. Their only loss so far is to BYU, but that loss, BYU is not looking as good as they were originally. When BYU was looking like the Big 12 favorite, they could still win the Big 12, by the way. But when they were looking like the Big 12 favorite, that was a really good loss. It's still a top 25 loss, but again, I question if they're going to put two ACC teams in. All right, so now we're moving on to So You're Telling Me There's a Chance. These are teams that have a shot here. Now, I've listed so far 11 teams, not including the Big 12 champion. So if you just add the Big 12 champion in there, that's 12 teams. That's the playoff. But we know college football, there's going to be teams that get upset. And with all the teams above them that are listed already, they're going to play each other most likely in the championship. So do those losses impact those teams? We'll see. All right, we'll start with the SEC teams. We've got Alabama, South Carolina, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M. All have 3 losses as of right now. Now, A&M is the only one out of these that has a chance to make the SEC championship. So A&M is the only one of those that controls its own destiny. If A&M wins out, they're in. Pretty simple. Beat Texas, beat Georgia, you're in. Now, that's where I would question, let's say A&M beats Texas and then loses to Georgia. Does that team get in with 4 losses over a 3-loss Alabama or South Carolina, which didn't make their championship, you know? Alabama, though, they had that's a bad loss to Oklahoma last night. I think that's going to impact them a little bit. South Carolina probably has the best resume here. They've got close losses. They did get kind of handball miss, but also in one of their losses, they had some questionable reffing. All right, and also they were without their quarterback, Sellers, which is he's been pretty dominant. But the LSU loss, there was some questionable stuff there. So South Carolina, I think there's a scenario this week where if the winner of them and Clemson, I think they might be in. I could be wrong, but again, I don't personally believe that 2 ACC teams are getting in. So you take off one of Miami and SMU, unless that second ACC team is Clemson, by the way. But you take off one of Miami and SMU, let's say they knock each other out in the championship. I think South Carolina or Clemson, the winner of that, is most likely going to end up getting in somehow. But we'll see what happens when you get there. And Ole Miss, bad loss to Florida this week. They were coming off, they had a good win a couple weeks ago over Georgia, a pretty dominant performance. And really, if they would have won out, they'd be in good shape. But Ole Miss drops that game, drops them back down in the pack. So I think those are the 4 teams that have a chance in the SEC, but they need some help. All right, the only ACC team on here is Clemson in this category. Now, again, I think Clemson is in good shape, really. I think if they beat South Carolina, I think enough things happen this week that they could get in. Now, you're going to come down to an argument over, let's say SMU loses to Miami. Does SMU get in over Clemson if Clemson has a win over South Carolina? I don't know. We'll see what happens when we get there. But as of right now, I think ACC could potentially get 2 teams in if it's Clemson. I don't think SMU and Miami both get in. All right, UNLV is the only. All right, so actually, let's go ahead and talk about all these group of 5 teams. UNLV, Tulane, Army are the 3 teams besides Boise that I think could potentially jump them. So UNLV, they're going to get to play Boise, so they could steal that spot. Or it would come down to the winner of Army and Tulane. If Boise wins, all bets are off here. It doesn't matter. But if UNLV wins, does the winner of Tulane and Army get jumped over UNLV in the rankings? Army, again, their only loss so far is to Notre Dame. Now, Notre Dame did handle them, but UNLV lost to Syracuse. So, how do you compare that? And then for Tulane, they've lost to Kansas State and Oklahoma. Now, would the winner of that jump over UNLV? I don't know, but it's definitely a possibility. All right, so now I've got the logjam of Big 12. So as of right now, if everybody wins next week, the Big 12 championship is going to be Arizona State and Iowa State, but there's definitely a scenario where all those teams could lose. So as of right now, the first 4 teams listed here, Arizona State, Colorado, BYU, and Iowa State all have 2 losses in conference play. The rest of them, Baylor, West Virginia, Tech, Kansas State, and TCU all have 3 conference losses. So let's say all 4 of those teams with 2 losses lose, then you've got like 8 teams with 3 losses where there's just a complete logjam. Actually, I said 8, it's 9. With just a complete logjam, and I don't know who's going to get in when that happens. But again, right now, if Arizona State and Iowa State win, that is your Big 12 championship. So that would be who gets in. But the rest of the teams on here technically do still have a chance. So as of right now, this is the tier list I'm looking at. I think there are 4 locks. Georgia and Penn State are really close to being locks. Even if they do lose, I think they'd be fine. The other teams, now if they take care of business and could be in, they'll be in. But again, who gets in? Because you're going to add one Big 12 team. The real question here is if everybody wins, does the winner of South Carolina and Clemson jump the loser of Miami and SMU? I think that's the scenario you run into here, unless the committee loves them some Alabama so much. Now, at the beginning of the year, I thought Bama could get in with 3 losses, but that wasn't including a blowout loss to a bad Oklahoma team. I thought they were going to lose to 3 good teams. If they had 3 top 25 losses, I think they could get in. But as of right now, this is where it's at. We'll see how it changes over the week. But what would you change on this list? Is there anybody you would add that's not on here? I think, again, there's 28 teams I think that have a somewhat chance at making the playoffs still left, even though we've got only a couple weeks to play. But let me know what you think down in the comment section. Make sure to like this video and subscribe.